Good evening. Welcome to the Writers Guild 2024 Creative Writing Festival. We are absolutely thrilled that you're here to celebrate literary arts programming in the Lower Columbia region. We are honored to have Karl Marlantes, author of Deep River, Matterhorn, and other books, along with his most recent, Cold Victory, as our keynote speaker tonight. I'm Deb Vanass, Secretary of the Writers Guild of Astoria. The Writers Guild is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that seeks to support writers and foster the literary arts in the Lower Columbia region. We're so grateful that you've joined us and hope you find inspiration wherever you may be on your journey as writers, readers, and fellow travelers through life. The Guild began in 2017 and was founded by Marianne Monson and numerous other board members who have served over the years. In 2024, we've put on more than 20 unique literary arts events that have served more than 1,000 people. We've led creative writing workshops in schools, hosted numerous readings, continued to produce the radio show River Writers for KMUN, and sponsored a writing in residence program with Astoria Visual Arts that is now in its 6th year. We could not do this work without our student interns, our members, and our dedicated volunteers who have worked to make tonight possible. We'd also like to acknowledge our board members, past and present, including Flax Glore, Logan Garner, and Ren McKeon. By the way, we are currently looking for new board members to help us plan 2025 and beyond. If you want to be part of a fabulous, vibrant organization in Astoria, please reach out to any of us and we'll be happy to give you more information. You can also become a member of the Writers Guild and sign up for our newsletter at thewritersguild.org. Our key sponsors this year include WANA Credit Union, the Marie Lamfrom Foundation, numerous local businesses whose names you can find on our website, Hotel Elliott, Fort George, and Liberty Theater. Generous funding from 100 Women Who Care, Clatsop County, made possible scholarships and tickets for local students for this event. Thank you to Marianne Monson, who is the lead organizer for this conference. Also thanks to Viandre Love and Asher Finch, who were key contributors. We're thrilled about the full schedule of events we have for you this weekend, including the wonderful writing workshops offered tomorrow at the Hotel Elliott, an evening of poetry performances tomorrow night at the Columbian Theater, and an author's book fair with silent auction at Fort George on Sunday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Full details are on our website, thewritersguild.org. I expect there might be a few aspiring writers out there, and if you are and you purchased a ticket only for tonight's event, you can deduct the ticket price from the festival pass if you'd like to add the rest of the weekend on. The Columbia Theater event is $10 at the door, and the author's fair is free and open to the public. And in addition, you would be attending or have the option to attend 7 workshops with fabulous presenters. And now, I'd like to introduce, or tell you a bit about, and then introduce to you our fabulous keynote speaker for tonight. Karl Marlantes is a graduate of Yale University and a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University. He served as a Marine in Vietnam, where he was awarded the Navy Cross, the Bronze Star, 2 Navy Commendation Medals for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, and 10 Air Medals. He is the author of Matterhorn, which won the William E. Colby Award given by the Pritzker Military Library, the Center for Fiction's Flaherty Dunnan First Novel Prize, the 2011 Indies Choice Award for Adult Debut Book of the Year, and the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation's James Webb Award for Distinguished Fiction. Subsequent books include Deep River, a novel about the Finnish immigrants who settled the Lower Columbia, What It's Like to Go to War, and his latest, Cold Victory. Karl lives in rural Washington. Please join me in welcoming Karl Marlantes.
Well, thank you. Is this working okay? All right. Yes, it's so wonderful to be here. Some of you know, but I was born about 2 blocks from here, St. Mary's Hospital. And there was a wooden wing of that, and I think that's been gone, but the bricks are still there. And I have some relationship with this theater because my mother left high school, Astoria High School, when she was 14 and got a job as an usher right here. And she also sold tickets, but they were hard in those days. They had to count at the end, she said, every time that the night was over. And if the money didn't add up to what the tickets were, they came out of your wages. And so she and the other girls had this sort of, which is not, it was kind of cruel, but then, this is like the early 30s maybe. There were so many foreign seamen coming in here who didn't speak English and didn't understand our money system. So they would always shortchange these poor sailors just in case the tickets didn't add up at the end of the... So anyway, that was a little bit of Astoria history. I was, like I said, I was born here, but then grew up in Seaside and went to Seaside High School. And grew up in this family that some of you were just at this thing up here in Long Beach Peninsula that I told this story. I'm sorry, I'm not a politician. I have to tell the same story every time I come out, because it doesn't change. But my mother is a Finnish speaker. She was born in Brix's logging camp, which is right across the river here. And she didn't speak English until she went to grade school in Deep River. And then she had to start learning English. And my father, who was Greek, that's where the Marlantes comes from, is his same thing. He grew up in a Greek-speaking family and didn't speak English until he was about 5 or 6 as well. And of course, my grandmother, who lived here in Astoria, spoke Finnish, but she was married to a Norwegian, Leif Erikson, and I always thought that they named this road after him, And then Grandma got divorced and married a Swede. So if you can imagine this, we've got Greek and we've got Swedish and Norwegian and Finnish and English. My older brother, one night after we had Thanksgiving dinner, he flopped on the bed and he said, Karl, we live in cultural linguistic schizophrenia. But it probably helped my writing because I love languages and I love words. And I thought that I would talk a little bit about motivation. Most of the people here, I think, are writers. And people always ask me, why'd you write that? What made you write that? And there's sort of an overarching issue, and then there's each one for the specific books. I always wanted to write, and I just read all the time. And Seaside Library then shared the building with the fire truck. I don't know if you remember that, but Mrs. Whitty, who was the librarian, took me under her arm, and she'd pump me full of books. Bookmobile would come down every 2 weeks, and that just was the way I spent childhood, was reading a lot. And I tried my hand at writing, and one of the great failures was I decided to write a black mass. And my dad got a hold of it, and he took me out to the backyard, and I had to put it in the burning barrel and burn it up. I loved it. But the other thing that also had to do with the burning barrel is that when I was about 7 or 8, I got a diary, an open diary for a Christmas present. And so I remember, writing in my diary. The first day was New Year's Day. And about I was probably about 9 or 10. I thought, it'd be interesting to see what I wrote my first day in my diary. And it was burned into my head because went down to the pond. There was a mill pond down where we lived. There were no ducks, but there was a snake. That was it. From humble beginnings. But what hit me, it was a profound thing, is that was the first time I realized I would never see that day again. That was, writing sort of went past time, and I became like aware that I'm mortal and I'm going to die. It was a very profound experience, and it had to do with writing that passage. Went down to the pond, there were no ducks, but there was a snake. And I'll never see that day again. And it hit me, boom, just like that. And people who write, I often make the analogy, it's like, when Jimi Hendrix was given his guitar at age, I think, 11, he slept with it, all right? And sometimes people come and say, Mary's really good at the piano, but she doesn't want to take piano lessons anymore. And should I force Mary to take piano lessons? I said, well, can Mary walk by the piano without touching it? Oh, sure she can. Don't give her lessons. It's like that with writing. You can't help yourself. You're always scratching something and thinking about something. And it's just part of your nature, I think. Of course it has to get honed. There's a lot of people, I got a book in me. Yeah, well, everybody's got that, getting it out. Which reminds me of, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty random now. If I have a woman who's a friend of mine who's a writer, and she was saying, she says, it is sort of like sex and having a baby. In the very beginning, it's just wonderful, and you're writing, and it's just really good. But in the end, you just want to get the damn thing out. So I always wrote and studied economics. I wanted to study English literature, but I remember one night just sitting there going, I can't make a living at this. And my older brother studied economics, and he did really well. He became the chairman of the board of Cushman and Wakefield. So, I thought, well, he wasn't then, but I could follow him. He, in fact, is the person behind Mellis and Matterhorn. Mellis is very good at sort of politics in the sense of power. My older brother was sort of the model for that. People say, was that you? And I go, if it was me, I'd be the governor and a lot richer than I am. But that's who inspired him. So I just had always wanted to do that, but I never studied it. I read literature and just always was reading. And I think, again, you writers, I heard an interview with Miles Davis. And if you think you're cool, you'll never be as cool as Miles Davis, And anyway, someone asked him, how do you become a great jazz musician? And he looked at him and he said, listen, listen, listen. And that's the same with being a writer. Read, read, read. It goes into your soul, it goes into your head. It's the only way to do it. You can study stuff like how to develop characters. In fact, you have to. When I did the first draft of Matterhorn, I thought it was damned easy. I punched out 1,700 A4 pages because I was in Europe, and it was an Olympic electric typewriter. And I finished it, and I went off to Ireland with my girlfriend, and came back to read the great American novel. I'm ready to go, and it was just crap. There were 3 or 4 pages on wet socks. And I thought, maybe there's something more to this novel writing than I thought. And so then I started seriously studying it. One of the things that some people are surprised by is I took Louis L'Amour and Danielle Steele, and I outlined their books. Not all of them. There's too many of those. But both of those people know how to make people turn pages, you know, and what is it? What do they do? And so I picked up, you know, up a tree, down a tree sort of plots from just outlining some other works. And I started reading now with an eye toward, so why did Tolstoy do it that way? I mean, Tolstoy could make a character out of a horse in a paragraph. You know, how does he do that? You know, well, he does it with a specific detail. Ah, I see. Okay, so reading with an eye toward how do they do that is something that I found very useful. What motivated me about Matterhorn? Obviously, I was in the Marine Corps, and served in basically up in the mountains of Vietnam, in northern I Corps, and you heard the bio, I came back and I thought, well, I'm going to write the great American novel about the Vietnam War, and I told you how that worked out. And someone once asked me, well, why do you keep at it? It took 35 years before I got it published. And there are some gifts from the garbage, because my characters got better and better because I kept working at it. I mean, I kept trying to sell it. I mean, I never counted them. I just started throwing the rejection slips away. But someone asked me once, what motivated you to keep going? And I had never really thought about it. You know, I mean, I'm just a damn fool, you know, that might be it. There were times I would literally go down to some bookstore at 9 o'clock at night and look at pick novels off the shelf and go, I'm as good as this person. Why don't they publish me? You know, I mean, so hang in there. You'll get there. But I thought, you know, what did keep it to me? And there's two incidents that are important to what motivated me about keeping at Matterhorn. The first one, and again, I apologize if some of you have heard this story because I can't change it, is that I had come back from Vietnam, and I was pretty much a mess. But I was working at headquarters Marine Corps, and I was assigned at the Pentagon, and I had to take some papers to the White House, and so I had the briefcase with the lock on it and everything, you know, so like they see in the movies. But I thought, well, I'm going to the White House, so I got all spiffed up and put my ribbons on and shined my shoes, and I'm walking down just outside of the White House, and a group of students were across the street waving North Vietnamese flags and jeering me and calling me names. And I was just stunned. I had just gotten back about, 6 or 7 weeks before, and my friends were still over there fighting. And they were, the whole sort of baby killer thing, and I was just stunned, and I wanted to shout at them or tell them or talk to them and say, the people you're calling baby killers, they're 18. They're way younger than you are. But the only reason that they're over there and you're here is because you get to go to college, and they didn't. And I thought, but if I walk across the street to try and talk to these kids, I mean, it would just explode. Marine attacks students on Washington Street. I mean, I couldn't do anything. I was in uniform. I couldn't do anything except listen to it. And people walking by, nobody coming to my aid or anything. And I just wanted to tell my story and our story. And it was sort of finally just, walk across that street and tell them, here is what it's like. Here's what it's like to be 18, trying to grow up and fighting in a war that, quite frankly, doesn't make any sense. And, they're just like you, except they didn't get to go to college. I wanted to tell our story. And the other incident, which was very much the same kind of a motivator, is I was very enamored with this girl. She was studying D.H. Lawrence, which I thought was very sexy, And she was getting a master's in it. And so we had a couple of dates, and I finally thought, well, maybe I should tell her that, I'm a Vietnam veteran and I was a Marine. And so we're down at the bottom of the stairs that led up to her flat, and I say, well, I just got back from Vietnam about a year ago, and I was a Marine. And she recoiled. She was sitting on the stairs, and she stood up and she said, "Oh my God, they're the worst." And she went up the stairs, and I never saw her again. And Matterhorn is just trying to shout up the stairs. You know, here we are. Here's this, hello. You know, and so this need to communicate is a big part of Matterhorn. And there's also the part trying to get it out of my system. But the second book, which was What It Is Like to Go to War, was very much more specifically motivated by trying to get my life together. I'd killed somebody up really up front and personal, a young Vietnamese soldier, and in combat you normally don't actually make any sort of connection with the people. I mean, quite often you don't even see them. There's fire coming from the tree line or something, and you fire back and people die, and you don't even see them lots of times. But in this one particular incident, which I talk about in this second book, I crawled up to a position where this kid was throwing grenades at my group, and he looked at me and he had a grenade in his hand, and I looked at him, and he was no further away from me than the front row here. We actually locked eyes, and that's really very rare. And I remember whispering to him, "Don't throw it, I won't kill you. Don't throw it. If you don't throw that grenade, I won't kill you. I won't shoot." But I mean, I didn't know Vietnamese, he didn't know English. And he snarled at me and threw it, and I got hit with all the shrapnel, and I shot him right through the head. And okay, that's fine, I'm busy, I have to get organized for the counterattack, and the war goes on, and I didn't think anything of it until the early 90s, and I had not thought anything of it. And I'm driving up I-5, and it's the middle of the night, and I have 5 kids, and I was away from the kids. It's like, yay, country music, I can listen to what I want. 2 in the morning, and I'm driving up, and all of a sudden I see these 2 eyes in the windshield. And I went, I'm sophisticated enough to know, okay, that's not a ghost. That's something that you got to deal with. The 2 eyes were looking at me in the windshield. And that's what motivated me to write that second book. I had to start turning these ghosts, and those are ghosts, into some kind of ancestors. And a friend of mine, Joe Bobro, actually coined that. He said, "Karl," he says, "you're turning your ghosts into ancestors with this book." He says, "Ghosts haunt you, and they're unconscious. And the ghosts are what get you into bar fights. They're what get you into drugs. The ghosts ruin your marriages. You'll never get rid of those experiences. And those of you who have had, experiences that are of a tougher nature, whatever they are, you'll never go away. That's part of you. That's who it is. That's you. And you got to just get them so they don't haunt you." And so I started writing so that this ghost would come out and I would get it in front of me. And it doesn't have to be writing. It can be music. It can be just talking to your spouse. There's a lot of ways to get this unconscious, haunting ghosts out in front of you, so then they become ancestors and they don't drive you crazy or get you in trouble. So What It Is Like to Go to War was basically dealing with that and all of the things about war, including the fact that, you give a 19-year-old the role of God. Well, 19-year-olds don't deal well with becoming God, but that's what our government does, and it's like they make decisions about life and death. They make horrible, difficult decisions. A corpsman that I know, there was a wounded NVA soldier, terribly wounded. We had to move. We had to get out of there because there's other danger coming. We didn't, and is he going to die? I mean, we can't take him prisoner. I mean, what are we going to do with him? I don't know. It was that kind of a dilemma. And he said, he was 20 years old. He said, he's going to die. And he walked over and shot him. And he did it out of mercy. I mean, it wasn't like he's one of these cold-blooded killers. This guy was a corpsman who really, really was there basically to save lives. But what do you do when someone's in such terrible pain and there's no way out? And there were tigers, and tigers, we lost a guy to tigers. I mean, they ate him because there was a lot of dead bodies around. And so I'm going like, that a kid who's 20 shouldn't have to be making decisions like that. But they do, and they have to come back with them and carry them. And so this book that I wrote dealt with things like that, the spiritual side of combat, the lying of combat, the fear and all that stuff. And what it did is it got my ghosts out. And I have to admit, there were times that there would be snot on the keyboard. I mean, I'd be just bawling my head off, and I go, "Oh God, this is terrible," and wipe it up, and then I'll keep going. And it was a very important book for me that way. Deep River is obviously it's a book about half of my family heritage, my Finnish side, and my grandmother, who is kind of I don't know what you call it, an inspiration for Aino, the principal female character in the novel. She's nowhere near as active in the IWW and all that sort of stuff that I made Aino, but she was in the IWW, my grandmother. And this is one of those things that's like when you just tuck it away. If you're a writer, you tuck it away. I came home from college, and some of you are of a certain age. You might remember Joan Baez singing the song about, "I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me." And I thought, wow, that's great, Joe Hill, yeah. So I come home and I go up to Grandma and I say, "Grandma," I said, "did you know Joe Hill, when you were in the IWW?" And she literally took a step back. "That son of a bitch." I was like, "Grandma, he's a left-wing icon. Come on, what's going on?" And she told me the story. She said they were, she was helped organize. She fed organizers, and she was a solid IWW union member. And she said that the deal was you had to get them to try and carry the card. That was a red card, and pay their union dues because these organizers have to eat. And it was really hard because if you got caught with an IWW card, you were fired. And not only that, you were blacklisted. You couldn't find a job anywhere in the lower Columbia area. And you'd have to move yourself and your family someplace else. I mean, it was a very serious, scary thing to be caught carrying the IWW card. And she said that she would work several years recruiting people, trying to get them to join the union. And then she said, that son of a bitch, he'd show up from some city like Portland, and he'd come to make a big rally, all kinds of songs. There'd be cops standing all around, all over the place, and he'd sing his songs, and he'd leave, and all that would be left was a bunch of torn up IWW cards. I went, wow, that's a different view of Joe Hill, Now, Joe Hill did have clay feet. I mean, he was incredible, iconic IWW singer, and wrote parodies, and it was important for the movement. But he also, I think that, as far as I can tell, he really did murder somebody in Salt Lake City, and kind of womanizer. Well, he obviously, I had to put him in the novel because of that story. And the other thing that was motivating me is I woke up one morning about 4 a.m. with an image of my grandmother looking out. She has a house that has a plate glass window that looks out on the river, the Columbia River. And I remember seeing her one time just looking out the river. And I woke up with this image of her looking out the river, and I'm thinking, what a life she led. I mean, she was born in 1889, and she watched people go to the moon. I mean, she grew up there were no cars, there was no electricity, and she watched people go to the moon. That's an amazing life. And I was thinking, wow, that's something. That should, Well, time goes on, and I haven't done anything about a book or anything, but I have images in my head. And I went back to Oxford when I was older. I had, by that time, 4 kids. And the one thing is, if you get a degree from Oxford, you can always go there and audit any class for free if you get permission from the lecturer or seminar leader. And they had a course there that I think only possible in Oxford called Old Norse Poetic Diction. And it was, believe it or not, it was the woman who ran it, Emily Dronke, was the Sigmafossen professor of ancient Icelandic antiquities. And I was the only person in that class that didn't speak 3 dead languages. And I started getting into the Norse sagas. And I started thinking, wow, you know, I could write a book. Like there was a particular saga called Laxdala Saga, and it's about a village in Iceland that was founded by, you know, Vikings. And it's the story of that village. It's called Laxdala Saga. And I thought, well, I could just transfer Laxdala Saga to Astoria or something. That'd be really cool. That'd be really neat. And then I got into the Kalevala. And those of you who are Finnish background, it's a national epic of Finland, very important to Finnish identity, because the Russians were trying, it belonged to Russia, and the Russians were trying to Russify everything and forbid you to speak Finnish. You couldn't get a job if you didn't speak Russian. And about 1850, a guy named Elias Landrot was a doctor, and he sent him off to the Kalevala district. And Kalevala means it comes from Kalevala district. And he started noticing these people singing songs, and very old. I mean, some people are pretty sure that they're pre-Christian for sure. And these figures are probably shamanic figures that may have been historical but have moved into the mythical. And it was a very important piece of Finnish identity. But what I thought would be, well, I'll take that and I'll make that a novel. Well, I started outlining it, and I realized that the Kalevala is just a series of songs, basically. There's no plot. So I'm like, oh God, now what am I going to do? You know, and then I thought, well, I'll take the characters. So all of the characters in Deep River have their roots in characters from the Kalevala. You know, Vainamoinen and all these different characters. Joukahainen, Jouka, you know, and who was a great musician, and Aina, you know, those are all Kalevala characters, and so I wove those into the story. And the other thing that was an actual motivator that I wanted very much to portray was that when I was growing up, we were still logging old growth around here. And, you know, the log trucks would go right through town, through Seaside on the highway, because the highway then went through town. I'm still mad about them putting that highway right through my neighborhood, and there's now nothing but Taco Bells and Pizza Huts, and, you know, it ruined my little town. My wife once said to me, I said, yeah, sometime maybe I'd like to go back to Seaside, and, you know, maybe we could get a house there. And she said, we're never going to go back to Seaside, because all you'll do is bitch about how great it used to be, you know. So anyway, one log on a log truck. I mean, they were huge. I mean, their logs were, you know, this big. All they could carry was one. Now they carry about 40. I mean, what a difference. And little people, you know, this big, took those things down by hand. I mean, my uncle Yuka, great uncle actually, said sometimes it'd take him a couple of days to get one of these things down. 12 hours, you know, chop. I mean, these guys, you know, the Hollywood image of the lumberjack, this big giant guy with a plaid coat. No way. These are guys like college wrestlers. I mean, I was studying a mess hall, and the woman had analyzed the calorie inputs. 16,000 calories a day is what these guys burned. Michael Phelps, when he's training, burns 16,000 calories a day. I mean, these are incredible people, heroic people, but the irony is they cut down all the old growth. It's gone. Boom. And I thought, that's something I want to sort of show. And I think those of you who have read Deep River get the sense of how tough these people were, the men and the women. I mean, I don't think anybody today could put in the dining hall hours that those girls did and the work they did. I mean, they'd be exhausted, bawling their heads off. And the loggers, dangerous, and yet the irony, it's all gone. Columbia River, 72 guys died building Grand Coulee Dam. We turn on a light switch and we don't remember 72 guys died building Grand Coulee Dam. And the Columbia River doesn't even flow anymore. It's a series of lakes. So there's the irony of this heroism and this disaster. That was motivations for Deep River. And then the last one, which just came out in January, is called Cold Victory. And there was two things there. One, again, was a story that it was actually, we call him Uncle Dick, but he was married to my mother's cousin. But my mother and her cousin were like sisters. They all grew up together in one house. And he had been the military attaché to Finland in the 50s. Deep River set in the 40s. Cold Victory set in the 40s. And he told me this story. There was a Finnish school a military school, high school age, and every year they had an annual cross-country ski trek, which was very tough, very demanding, 6 or 7 days out in the wilderness in the snow. And my uncle was a good skier, and they apparently knew that, and so they invited him to go. And he was ready, and he loved it. And he said the Russians were always very suspicious, the Soviets at that time. And he said that they heard that he was going with this group of students from this military school, and so they got the military school to invite one of their guys and to go on the trek. And this guy was kind of out of shape, and my uncle knew him, and he said he's a good guy. I mean, he really liked this guy. He was professional Soviet soldier, Red Army. And so they started on this trek, and what happened in those days, Finland could not criticize the Soviet Union at all. If they said anything, they had the Red Army on the borders. They had a Navy base that they had to succeed on the Pohjola Peninsula, I think that's the name of it, 20 kilometers from Helsinki, a Russian Navy base. They couldn't move. It was a terrible thing, and they lost a lot of land to the Soviets. And what happened then is that they started doing it in the sports page. But it was like they turned it into a race. The newspapers, America, democracy, freedom versus the Soviets, the Russians, the communists, and it was all in the papers. And my uncle was oblivious to it. He was out there in the wilderness skiing. Well, it went the equivalent of viral. It got into the Los Angeles Times. It got into Paris Soir. It got into, Pravda. And unfortunately, the higher-ups in the Soviet Union knew about what was looking to be a race between, democracy and communism, and as personified by these two guys. Well, the Russian collapsed finally. He just couldn't do it after 3 or 4 days. And so they had to ski him out to a road, and he got picked up. My uncle watched it. He got picked up in a Ziv, big black Russian car, and he said he never saw him again. He went to the embassy and asked about him, and the guys at the embassy said never heard of him because he embarrassed the Soviet Union. And that stuck with me. I was like, wow. Well, so that's in that book, And the other thing that motivated it was 2014. The Russians took over Crimea, and we did nothing. We did nothing. And these, the old Marine comes out in me, and we just let them do it. That was shameful. And I thought that's what happened to Finland. Finland fought all alone in 1939, and no help from the West, none. But the Finns, none of them will tell you that they lost, but they did. They lost. The Russians just overwhelmed them finally in the continuation war. 11% of Finland is now in Russia, just taken away from them, and it looks so similar to what's going on in Ukraine. And so I said, I'm going to write a book that has the echoes of Ukraine in it, and uses stories like the one I just told you. And so Cold Victory is you'll read it. It's actually about totalitarianism versus freedom, and how naive we are about it, how we have no understanding about what we've got here. And I can tell you my last story, because I know we're going to have to get into some questions here. I was with my kids in Srinagar, and Srinagar is 96% Muslim, but it's controlled by Hindus, by the Indian state. And there's always unrest there. And I was living with a family of Sikhs and with my kids, and a guy came back from the Hajj, and it riled everybody up, and there was a big riot. I mean, cars being overturned, gasoline bombs being thrown, people marching in the street, and I'm out on the front porch with this big stick and with my Sikh friend, and we put the family and the kids under a big wooden table in the middle of the kitchen. And I'm sitting here like this, a little bit scared. And I turn to my friend and I say, "Where are the police?" And he looks at me like I just fallen out of a coconut tree. And Karl, the police are Muslims. Oh, that's not about the rule of law. Yikes. That was the first time I realized how lucky we are so far that the police are on the side of the law. That's a big deal. And so this book talks about naivete, and some people have criticized my character, Louise. Nobody could be that naive. And I tell them, I said, you don't know, you are naive about how naive Americans are. I spent a lot of time overseas, and it's embarrassing how naive we are about what we have, and what we take for granted, and what we're doing to ourselves. I mean, the couple from Russia, they have to whisper at night, in the bed, so that their au pair won't report on them to the KGB, and they never know whether the other one's telling the truth or not, because they're afraid to speak their mind. And I'm going like, we're doing that to ourselves. I mean, I'm afraid to go up to somebody and say, "Hey, are you going to vote for Harris or Trump?" I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to have any trouble. So we shut up. Whatever happened to that, see? But so we don't need a totalitarian government to shut us up. We're doing it to ourselves. And so all that sort of wound into the book, and that was the motivation of that one. So I think that's my story. And there's going to be some questions. I'm going to answer some questions here, and then we're going to have questions from the audience. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Karl. So much to think about there. Karl will now be joined by Marianne Monson on stage for a conversation. Marianne Monson is a women's history author known for unearthing remarkable stories of incredible women. She's the author of 12 books, including Frontier Grit, The Opera Sisters, and Women of the Blue and Gray. She's the founder of the Writers Guild, co-host of River Writers, and has interviewed numerous authors, including Jericho Brown, Randall Sullivan, and Cheryl Strayed. Please join me in welcoming Marianne Monson.
Thank you so much. I want to mention Deb Vaness, who's the Guild's secretary and actually was the one who came up with the theme for our conference, The Power of Place, which I think ties in so beautifully to Karl's work. So, and thank you so much, Karl, for being here tonight. That was just incredible.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
It's like home.
Such an honor to talk with you and to have you here as part of our festival. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I think I told you that I read Deep River a few years ago, and as a woman who writes historical fiction, I'm very sensitive about female characters. I was like, okay, what's this guy doing with Aina? I'm not sure. I'm going to see. And you totally won me over. And by the end of that book, I was like, he did it. Dang it. He did it. And then I had to go up to FinFest to meet you, to get you to sign my copy of Deep River. So,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, so that was how that all started. And then because I knew I was going to interview you, I thought, well, I better read Matterhorn. And I'm pretty sensitive, and a war novel, I know it's going to impact me. I know it's going to be in my dreams. I know it's going to be, it's an undertaking. And I wasn't sure if I was up for it. So I told Asher, the Guild intern, I'm going to try 20 pages, and if I can't handle it, I'm just going to stop and go read some summaries online. And I was just hooked. I was hooked, and it was a difficult, challenging read, but I came away just with so much deep, profound respect for what you accomplished in both of those books. Such different books.
Yeah,
but,
they are.
yeah.
Sebastian Younger wrote a review of it, which was great in the New York Times, and he said, it's more of a tour of duty than a read.
Yeah. Yes. Less a book and more of a deployment. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get to Matterhorn. I was going to start with Deep River, actually. Okay, so, I wanted to just ask a couple questions about your writing process. So you write really long books. I didn't heft my Matterhorn copy out here on stage with me, but what is it, 700?
It's big.
And change.
Yeah.
You don't write thin little books. So those kinds of books require years of dedication. And can you talk a little bit, I know you touched on it a bit, but the 35 years that it took you to get to publication with Matterhorn?
Yeah, no one would take it. I would write, I read books about how to write query letters, all you writers know this stuff. And I guess that I can't write query letters, but I can write novels because and some of the things that it would be one of the ones that give you people some hope. These guys in New York, they're in business, and it's a difficult marriage, art and business. They're not Philistines or anything, but they have to make a profit. 7 out of 10 books lose money. 2 out of 10 break even. 1 out of 10 has to carry it. You know what that is? That's the exact odds of wildcat oil well drilling. 1 out of 10. So put that in your head. And so when people reject you, it's like they try to tell you something about, they try to make it look like they're rational about it. And what got me thinking this way was that I got a rejection letter. He didn't read the manuscript, he just read my query letter. Sorry, we can't sell this because it looks to me like you've got some really great characters, but I don't see how you can get a plot that anybody's going to want to read. And then 2 days later, I got another letter, rejection from a New York agent, that said, it's a really interesting idea for a plot, but these characters just seem flat to me. And I went, I get it. They're embarrassed to tell you that they just are guessing that they can't sell it. Yeah. And they can't own up to just saying, I'm sorry, I don't think I can do it. They have to make themselves sound intelligent as to why they're rejecting you. But believe me, they're rejecting you because they're just looking ahead and they're hoping, is this the 1 out of 10? I don't think so. And that's what you're up against.
Yeah. Well, your complaints about writing query letters, I think, land well in this audience. So we agree.
But anyway, to answer your question about 35 years, it was just a long slog. I'd work on, when weekends, or I'd be on vacation and the kids would be on the beach and I'd be, working away on the novel, and all my kids would be rolling their eyes, Dad's novel, But it was all good because it got better and better. I don't know how much time we've got to go in. I have so many stories,
I've got a lot of note cards, but
okay, well,
I knew we weren't going to get them all.
Yeah.
I love your stories, so go right ahead. No one's going anywhere, right?
All right, okay, because look, 35 years, it's like now it's 2008, and I started Matterhorn in the 70s. And I finally decided, well, it's never going to get published, and so I'll probably just, leave it in a manuscript form, and maybe my grandchildren will read it, who knows. And a friend of mine had the manuscript, and he went to Berkeley, and a guy he went to Berkeley with became an English professor at Berkeley, and he started a small nonprofit corporation called El Leon Literary Arts. And what they did is their idea was to get a book out for people who have a hard time breaking into the big time market. Because if you had a book that was published, then the risk was down for people because it had been edited and it was already a thing, you could sell it. And so he explained this new business to my friend, and my friend said, wow, he said, I've got a pretty good manuscript, maybe that you'd like to do that. And Tom Farber, who's the publisher, he has two people, him and Kit Duane. And Kit Duane is a pro bono. She's probably about 75 or 80 now. Anyway, she worked for Lonely Planet, and she edits for free. And so he says, well, send it to my senior editor, Kit Duane, And so my friend calls me on the phone. He says, Carl, he says, Tom says he's publishing a book. I said, Ken, this is a novel about Marines set in the Vietnam War, and you want me to send it to a female reader in Berkeley, California? I said, no way. I said, it costs $50 to make a copy of this damn thing. Anyway, I ponied up the $50, and down it went, and Kit loved it. She was the first one. And what's really interesting, it was a whole string of women that finally got it published. She took it to Tom. Tom got some money together to make a 1,200 copy run. My pay was 120 free copies. So now I had 120 copies of Matterhorn in the garage. What am I going to do with this? And it was still, so I'd write newspapers, hi, I've published a book and it's really good, and can you review it? One woman who I still hate the Boston Globe. This woman from the Boston Globe wrote me back and says, I don't do American wars. And I thought, what do you do, French wars or something? It's just snotty stuff. One guy wrote back and said, no. That was it. I said, God, a bad day at the office or what? But anyway, so my wife, who's pretty good at marketing and stuff, and she's saying, well, your problem is no one will read it. Right, that's my problem. She says, why don't we enter it into contests? Because if they have any integrity, they'll have to at least read the first 2 or 3 pages. I thought, yeah, that's good. And so I call Tom up, and Tom says, I don't have any staff to send books off to, contests. You have to do that on your own. I'll send them the books. And because self-published books are very difficult to get someone in a contest to take. They want publishers. So Ann and I put together a giant spreadsheet of contests. I mean, everything we could think of and find, reading all the stuff. I mean, first novel by left-handed Swedish immigrant from Ballard, Washington, $5 for the prize. Well, one of them, and then if we get somebody saying, yeah, please send it, we'd send it off, or we'd call Tom and he'd send it off. And we sent it off to the Barnes & Noble Discover Great Writers contest. And some woman in Wisconsin read it, and she liked it. And so she said, they volunteer to read new writers. These are staffers at Barnes & Noble. She sent it off to Jill Lamar, who was the head of that program, and she liked it. And she sent it to her boss, Cecily Hensley, who is the chief fiction buyer for Barnes & Noble. And Cecily loved it. But what she said to Jill is, she said, if I take this and go to publishers with it, this little house in California will have to borrow enough money to make a run big enough for Barnes & Noble. And if it doesn't sell, they'll go out of business. And I don't want to do that to them because it actually had happened before. so she took the book, and if Cecily Hensley walks into your office and she's the chief fiction buyer for Barnes & Noble, I mean, you're going to kiss her on the lips and what do you want, you know? And so she sold Matterhorn for me to Grove Atlantic. And Morgan Interkin went out, and the deal with El Leon was, for my 120 free books, was they had all the rights, movies, worldwide, it had all the rights for 3 years or until the first run sold out. And so Morgan bought all the books. That sold out the first run, and that was Matterhorn. It's really, really counterintuitive, a bunch of women that the chain, yeah. It can happen to you.
You don't underestimate those women.
That's right.
In books. So one of the reviews that I love of Matterhorn, we're just going to skip to Matterhorn because that's where this is going. So by Derek Emerson, he said, Matterhorn has given us a story with experience of the immediate and the wisdom of decades. And I thought that so perfectly captured it because, you know, when you read that book, that is why it feels like a deployment. Like the battle scenes are so visceral, they're so raw, they're so immediate. Like you feel like you know a little bit of what it's like to go to war after reading that book, you know? But I think the fact that you had to sit on that book for 35 years, I imagine, is maybe what brought the experience of the decades to it.
Yeah, I grew up a little bit, yeah.
So I guess it was better for the book, really, in the long
It was.
yeah?
Like I said, it was better.
Yeah.
Like the first draft, I didn't deal with racism.
Yeah.
I was afraid to.
Uh-huh.
Just the sort of stuff you're talking about. Female character, I don't know, it's kind of scary. African-American character, that's kind of scary. But I went, you can't do the Vietnam War or the 60s without dealing with the racism in America. So, and it went. That was because, you know, I got older and didn't care as much, you know. But so it was true. And the immediacy thing was because of that first 1,700-page typed out mad draft.
Yeah.
That was only a year or two after I'd come back from the war. So everything was in my head and very visceral. So I had that. But it was first person. And I just threw that out, and I wrote the whole thing over again in third person. But I had that block of detail.
And I think one thing that, you know, I said that I'm really profoundly impacted. I mean, I remember, you know, any book about World War II I've read, like they're experiences for me, you know. But I wonder, it's my conjecture, that if a lot of war novels are sort of written from that first draft anger place, you know, like the war novels that you read and you just come away like, oh my gosh, like humans are horrible and there is no meaning and there is no anything and we all should just die, you know? Yeah. Because that's how I feel after I read some war novels. But I think with yours, there was this edge of compassion and empathy throughout it. And I felt like Mellis, like that was what he was there learning, which the last place I'd expect to go learn compassion is in war, you know?
Yeah, no, it's the Parsifal myth,
and
which you and I have talked about, and what Parsifal is kicked out of the Grail Castle because he fails to ask the question, what ails you, uncle? That's the question of compassion. And the Fisher King suffers, and that's where Eliot's The Wasteland comes from, because the male fecundity is stopped. And the earth dies, and because Parsifal doesn't ask the question of compassion. And you'll notice at the end of the novel, Fisher, Corporal Fisher, comes back. I mean, all those characters are from Parsifal, sort of like I did with the Kalevala.
Yeah, and I think you bring in, you know, war as a spiritual journey and practice, like that is apparently not new because Parsifal's been around for a while. But it felt new to me. I hadn't remembered somebody doing that with a war novel, you know? And so there was a lot more crying than I expected there to be. I don't know, I just pictured soldiers in war not crying, like being above that.
You know, I got criticized because I didn't call them Marines, I called them kids.
You did it.
Yeah, and that's because it's true.
Yeah.
The average age, I just talked about this, the average age in my platoon, I didn't have anything to do one day, so I got all their birth records out and I added up the average age, 18 and 10 months. That's average, okay? We had 17-year-olds fighting. Well, of course they start crying. You know, I mean, they're kids. And, you know, people have a very skewed idea of what, you know, young Marines are like or young infantrymen are like. Because, again, naivete and ignorance, we're really separated from the military. In between my marriages, I was dating this woman who was a very liberal Seattle woman, you know, the type. And I was invited to the Marine Corps ball, and I thought, oh, this will be great, you know. I'll get my tuxedo out, and she can get a nice dress, and we'll go to the Marine Corps ball. And I said, you want to come to the Marine Corps ball with me? And she went, it's way outside of my comfort zone. I don't know how I could do that. And I looked at her and I said, do you know what Marines are like? And she said, not really. I've never been around them. I said, they're like high school kids. Do you think you could be around some high school kids for an evening? Yeah. Well, that's what you're going to do. And when we went to the table, we sat down at the table. Honest to God, the kid next to us was 19, and his girlfriend was a sophomore from Lincoln High School. And you know, but we have a misunderstanding. Marines are young because it's so physical. And I wanted to get that across. I wanted to just, you know, show that. And as long as I'm talking, well, one of the things that you mentioned that I think people who write and people who read should try and understand is that literature is, I think, the only really good art form where you get out of your skin. You identify with a character, and then you get changed. If you're looking at a movie, it's sort of here, it's a camera's eye. But if you identify with a character and go through what that character goes through, you actually have experienced something. It's not exactly the same, but it's the only art form, I think, that gets you out of your own skin. And that's huge. It's a huge thing that brings empathy to the world and spiritual growth to the individual. So go literature.
Yeah, and connection and intimacy, this incredible connection that happens between the reader and the writer. You feel like you've shared a journey together, you know?
Well, it has to be. I mean, if there wasn't a reader, all you'd have is a bunch of pulp with black dots on it, right? It's only a work of art when someone reads it.
Yeah.
So it's only half done when the writer gets done with it.
It's really created in the reader's mind.
Yeah.
It's a dream co-collaborated in the reader's mind. Yeah, it's incredible that way. And I think for me, and I told you this, my son has served in the National Guard for the last 6 years, and he's just about to get out and to finish without a full-time deployment. And I think for the last 6 years, I've just been holding my breath, like, is he gonna get sent overseas, you know? And reading your novel right as he's about to get out without having had that, like, I was picturing myself in Vietnam, I was picturing you in Vietnam, and I was picturing my son
Of course.
in Vietnam, you know? And so that's, I think, why it was just such an incredibly moving experience. I didn't know about jungle rot. I didn't know about the leeches that the Marines contended with. I didn't know about being eaten by tigers. I didn't know 5 U.S. servicemen killed there were 16 years old and one was 15 years old. Why do you think there's so much about the Vietnam War that is unknown to us?
I think because we got rid of the draft. When I grew up, everybody's uncle and father were World War II veterans, or they were loggers, and there was a bit of tension in my town about that. Everybody in town knew that a destroyer was smaller than a battleship, or a platoon was smaller than a regiment. Everybody in town knew that stuff because people were directly connected. We now have divorced ourselves from that, and the military, half of the military comes from 7 southern states. All right, that's not exactly a good distribution for a republic. And the other thing that's gone on that I think we're not aware of is in World War II, if you took the zip codes of where people, they didn't have zip codes then, but the income levels and top, what is it called? Anyway, the top 3 deciles and versus the bottom 3, The bottom 3 in income died at 1.2 times the rate as the top 3 because they didn't know how to type and they didn't write and they didn't get jobs in the rear, and so that's just the way it was. In Vietnam, it went to 1.4 because college kids got out of it. In Iraq and Afghanistan, it's at 1.7. This is a bad trend. And you wonder why people don't know what's going on in the military. It's because we're completely divorced from it now. It's just, oh, God, that takes care of it. This one just drives me crazy, but it's like, okay, here's the rifle, the M4 rifle, and it's built by, people that are fed by farmers and that are taught by second-grade school teachers, and it's financed by bankers, and it's this whole chain of people linked that all have responsibility for building this weapon, paying their taxes. But at the end of that long chain, some 19-year-old pulls the trigger, and everybody says, oh, he did the killing.
Yeah.
So Vietnam was the first time that started happening.
Right. Well, and what you just said, can you repeat that a large percentage of the current military comes from 7 southern states?
Half.
Half, yeah. And I just wonder, given that we're a few weeks away from election, I wonder how that contributes to the sense of alienation. For the primarily, like a lot of people who serve in the military are more on the conservative side, right? And they are more from the southern states. And I just think that probably exacerbates divisions.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
I mean, when I came back, now I'm pretty old, but when I came back, I could not join the Democratic Party because they were the ones that were spitting on us, and they were the ones that were out protesting. And I'm glad they protested. I thought the war was really dumb, but this disdain and this sort of holier than thou. And I went, I can't be with those people. We had Mark Hatfield, and we had the governor who did the bottle bill, and the Republicans in Oregon were sort of rational people back then. I thought, well, that might be all right. So it was because of that feeling, and I'm sure that it's way worse now. And politics is not about thinking. I mean, some policy wonks think, but it's a gut reaction. It's visceral, and if you feel alienated, then you're going to vote against the people that you are angry at, and I think we do have trouble with that. So far, I've been around the military a lot, and I still deal with it a lot. The officer corps still believes in the Constitution, but you have an enormous number of people in the listed ranks that are very pro-Trump. Yeah, very. And I have a good connection with a Delta Force unit, which is a very supreme Army unit. And I asked the guy, I said, how many people are pro-Trump? He said, oh, I think almost all of us. And I went, ooh.
Well, it's also a community thing, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
a community identity
It's
thing,
us and
right?
them.
Yeah, for
because
sure.
American people have basically farmed it out.
Right. So you have said before that we prepare young men and young women to kill for their country, but we don't necessarily prepare them adequately to deal with the weight of having killed for their country. Can you talk a little bit about what we could do better in that regard?
Oh, yes. We've got another hour. We've gotten better. When I came back from the war, I still had a year to do, but I was on the airplane with a bunch of Marines who were finished their tour. We got off the airplane at El Toro Marine Base in Southern California, and there were card tables lined up all the way down the runway. We were all in a line. Not me. I watched them all, one table after the other, and they were processed out. And the last table, they asked them if they wanted the cash or the airplane ticket to the home of record, and they were out. They landed there from Vietnam, and they were mustered out and on their own.
Bye.
Hello.
Yeah.
We talk about not dealing with it. They do better now. At least they try, and it's also different because it's all volunteer. So they have that. The Marines, of course, have always been all volunteer. they're now working. People are taking it seriously. I mean, I've been invited to talk to like the chaplain of the Navy and the Marine Corps. She's also a Navy officer, but they're trying to work it out and seeing that we've kind of failed that way, and dealing with the suicides and why we're having so many suicides, so we're not there yet, but you have to remember when I wrote the book, it was the 70s.
Yeah.
but it's still, we got a long ways to go, and I think the biggest problem is reintegration, and it's two sides of that makes it difficult. Coming back into community is really hard, and you've done terrible things, and you feel like, oh, I don't know if they'll accept me if I tell them the truth, so you don't want to tell them the truth, so you want to hide. But if you can't tell people who you are, then you can't be part of the group. And I don't know what you call them, civilians are afraid. Well, I don't want to talk to you about the war. I mean, thank you for your service. That's good. Okay, that's, I don't want to get him upset or anything, so they won't do it. And then the reaction to that is, well, I'm not going to talk to these goddamn people. And the combat veterans have a chip on their shoulder that big. Well, they'll never get back into community until you actually get them talking to each other. And I think that we need to make a lot more headway on community getting together, talking about veteran experience, town halls, I don't know, church groups, I don't know where you find it, but just talking to a shrink isn't going to do it, because or to other veterans. You can go down to the American Legion and get drunk for every Friday night, but you're not going to join community, just that community, which is not the community.
But don't you think a lot of times with traumatic experiences, you talk to yourself about it first, and then maybe a psychologist, and then other people, like you just tiptoe because of that fear, of that shame, right? Mm-hmm. That the wound that you carry is going to get worse, that it's going to be made worse.
Absolutely. And let's face it, most of these combat veterans are guys, and they're pretty bad at getting in touch with their feelings. I actually think it's genetic. I don't think it's cultural. But I had to tell you this funny story. So, I finally got to a VA shrink, Sharon Rapp, and she's great. And she'd say, okay, talk about it. I said, well, and then I saw this guy, and we locked eyes, and I killed him. How'd you feel about that? I don't know. All right, next session, next week, we talk about something else. And, yeah, and then my friend, fell out of the helicopter and died. And how'd you feel about that? I don't know. So the third time I did that, she got mad at me, and she said, all right, here's how it's going to be. There are only two feelings in the world, happy and sad. And I'm going to ask you how you feel about it, and you're going to have to choose happy or sad. We'll start there.
That shows how far you've come, Karl. That's a long way. That's amazing. I'm curious if some of the people that you served with have read Matterhorn, and what they've thought about it. They tell you got it all wrong, or
no. I had a guy. He wasn't one of the people I served with. He was a Marine. He had 7 Matterhorns, and he stacked them on the table and said, I want you to sign them all. I said, wow, 7? How come you're buying so many? He said, I've got a wife and a brother and 5 kids, and I can't tell them about what I did in Vietnam. I just choke up. I go golfing. I just clam up. I just can't do it. I'm going to give them each this book because it's going to tell them exactly what it was like, and I won't have to do it myself. And that made me feel pretty good. And so I've never had anybody, get upset with me. I mean, I was worried about, African Americans, but I did a lot of research, and I called my friends who were African Americans, and can I say this? Yeah, you can say that, and I, you got it right. It was important because racism was huge. And today, young people today will read military guys, and they'll go like, what? There was racism in the Marine Corps? Yeah, there was.
Yeah, well, that's impressive, that your friends were saying what I said about Ino. I have to admit he got it right.
Yeah.
But you've ended up having the opportunity with Matterhorn to talk with a lot of Vietnam vets, right? Mm-hmm. And to do a lot of work with them. Has that surprised you that it ended up taking you that direction?
Yeah, it actually did. Surprise isn't the right word. I never imagined it, and it just sort of fell into it because once it got out, one thing that was really very, very nice is that a young man read Matterhorn, and he said, "This sounds like what my father-in-law went through." And so he took the book to this guy, his name's Harold Wilson, and he said, "That's us." And so this son-in-law started trying to contact people, and now every summer, Charlie Company, which is my marine company, gets together at Harold's place in North Carolina. And it's because of Matterhorn. I mean, it's really nice, and I get invited to do a lot of work. The other thing is a lot of special operation guys and that kind of stuff, they can't talk because it's. First of all, it's a stigma if you go to a psychiatrist or psychologist. And second, because a lot of it's secret and I have the right clearances, I'll just listen to them. And so I find that very helpful to them, and it makes me feel good. So well, I can still, pitch in and get some good done. So yes, I mean, Matterhorn has been good that way. What It's Like has been very good that way. It's taught in all the military academies. It's taught at the war colleges, and I get invited to these places and talk to the students, and that's all been very good.
Yeah. What do you think the cost to our society is when we fail to make a serious study of history?
Oh boy, stupid decisions, Never assume a conspiracy when just plain stupidity will suffice. I mean, we have so many examples of people who do not read history and do not learn the lessons of history. I can't tell you how many people with cold victory go like, I didn't know Finland, was on the side of Germany against Russia, What? You're a Finn. You should know that. Well, I have to tell you this other story. Ina, my grandmother, I said, Ina, I said, well, can you define Sisu? And she looks at me and she says, yes, that's what won the Winter War in '39. Anyway, yes. Is that better? Okay.
Great. Is it true you write your books by hand?
Yes, the first drafts. I have this theory that you need to be connected to your body, and quite frankly, if you're writing on a keyboard, then you start editing at the same time, and it's like and it takes you twice as long to get through it, and you're stopping the flow all the time. If I do it by hand, then I'm too lazy to go back and change it. So it works better. It's more visceral in my body. I don't know if that's a true theory or not. That's the way I do it.
Actually, it is true. There's good research on that.
Is there?
Yeah. That's why taking notes by hand in college courses, you retain more of it.
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Probably helps you track your characters better. Which sometimes we all sometimes have those moments where we forget our character. But I think you've said that your favorite moments with writing, it's like you disappear and you sort of become that. Any of the
I think the athletes call it being in the zone. The quarterback doesn't even think; he just knows where his end's going to be and tosses it, and the end's there. There's some sense of being in the zone, and when you're doing writing well, you're out of the way. Mm-hmm. I think that Shakespeare is my favorite example of this. Nobody knows whether he was Catholic or Protestant, whether he was gay or straight. Nobody knows anything about him. But that's because he disappeared. Yeah. And all that stuff came through him. and he got out of the way. And when that happens, I'll sometimes be in it, and I'll wake up, and I'll go like, oh my God, I'm here. Wow, instead of in where the scene was. It's a wonderful feeling, and it doesn't happen all the time. And the only way it happens, I'm sorry to say, you just put yourself down on the seat at the back around the same time every day. So your whole body says, now it's time to write. And lots of times, again, you write for 4 hours. That's about what I can do. And then you come back the next day and you go, oh God, throw it out. You have to be able to throw stuff out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, spirituality is really woven closely throughout both of your novels. In Deep River, you have, I don't know, I'm going to say her name wrong probably, Vasutati.
Vasutati.
Yeah, Vasutati. Who's a shaman native, and Ilmari seeks wisdom from her.
Ilmari. You're in Astoria now.
When I first moved here, I said something about wanting a sauna, and the first thing they said was sauna. Okay.
You're getting there.
Yep. And in Matterhorn, you explore the conflicts, the spiritual dimension of conflicts, the sacrifice and intimacy of battle, the spiritual progression to compassion. And a quote from Matterhorn that I just love is, he says, and it's speaking of Melas, your main character, he cursed God directly for the savage joke that had been played on him. And in that cursing, Melas, for the first time, really talked with his God. His cries were the rage and hurt of a newborn child roughly being taken from the womb. Comment on all of that spirituality. Are you intentional about weaving spirituality through your books, or is it just such a part of you?
Well, it's part of me, but it's also, that novel is about becoming a real person. Parsifal, it's a story of a boy becoming a man, and there's a lot of rebirth symbolism in all of our mythologies. So Melas was into politics. He was into trying to get ahead. He wanted to get a medal. Surface stuff. And he had to basically, get the shit kicked out of him by God to finally go like, oh, and then he's kind of reborn, pulled out, kicking and screaming. It reminds me of a great quote by Carl Jung. He said, it's too bad that people go kicking and screaming to the destiny that they would end up with anyway.
It's very true. Absolutely. Well, thank you. I want to ask a couple questions about Deep River for sure. We talked about the mythology and the Parsifal myth, and which I had to, of course, go look up. It had been a little while. I was a little rusty on Germanic middle-aged romances. But it's really an epic covering 30 years of a family's evolution, the Koski family. Did I say that one right?
Koski.
Koski. Do not speak Finnish. And focus on the Finnish immigrants who settled this area, which I didn't realize before I read the novel. I knew that there were a lot of Finnish immigrants, but I didn't realize that it was really a result of the Russian conflict that was going on, that was leading to waves of immigration.
Yeah. My grandmother's brothers basically left because they didn't want to get drafted.
Yeah.
And if you got drafted into the Russian army, 20 years.
Wow.
It was no joke.
Yeah.
As Biden would say, no joke.
That's incredible. So your Finnish grandmother was a card-carrying Red.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, a Red.
Like the people who built my house. I told you.
That's right.
My house was built by Finnish immigrants in 1914. It's in Upper Town in Astoria. And when I was restoring it, I found beneath the layers of flooring material, they had used the Finnish newspaper that was published here in Astoria, which was a very socialist communist newspaper.
I'll have to tell you about newspapers. I'd come up and visit my grandmother in Astoria. I live in Seaside. And on the kitchen table would be what I thought was the local Astoria paper, which was called the Daily Worker. it wasn't until I was in high school that I realized, oh, that isn't the Astoria paper.
And somewhere I read that your grandmother wouldn't let you play with the children.
That's right. No, yeah. I mean, I came home once, I was staying at her house, and I came home with this little boy. We'd met and we played, and then I said, oh, come over to the house and we'll do something at Grandma's house. And he walked in, and my grandmother just shoot him out. Get out of here. You go home. I don't want you in our house. You go home. And I was like, I'm like about 8 or 9. I said, why, Grandma? They're church fins. He's from church fins. We don't like them. Oh. Yeah, and it's still in Astoria in the 50s, church fins were white and Grandma was red.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that generation has died out, so I think that's kind of calmed down a bit in Astoria. But it was real. It was real, but it's still in the 50s, because the Civil War was only 30 or 40 years old, and all those people lived through it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you remember that you really had to speak multiple languages to work in the shops as well.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. In the 50s, you didn't get hired with a retail job unless you spoke either Finnish or Norwegian.
Yeah. Yeah, I've read contemporary newspapers where they talk about walking down the streets of Astoria, and you can hear 10 different languages spoken on a given day.
It was really great.
Yeah, amazing. So for those of us who love Astoria and this area, the whole lower Columbia, reading your book is a chance to walk the streets of this town 100 years ago. There's places like Suomi Hall, Tapiola, Labor Temple. They start to make so much more sense, right? And even our co-op. Like, there's a long tradition here of cooperative businesses.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how did the landscape provide both inspiration and research for your novel?
How did it provide inspiration?
Inspiration and research, yeah.
Well, the research is I just grew up in Seaside, which then was a logging town, and we'd get on our bikes and go out to the logging shows because it was really fascinating, and they'd shoo us away, and then we'd sneak around the other side and watch, So I was around logging because I just was curious about it, and a little kid, and I was always out in the woods. And it was so much freedom in those days. I'd tell my parents, I'd be like about 12, and I'd have my little 22, and I'd go out, and I'd say, well, I'm going to go out in the woods. I think I'll come back tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it was just, that was fine, just check in tomorrow,
See you then.
So I grew up, in this area, around the logging, around the woods. My grandfather was a fisherman, and I worked for him in the summers, which I hated. I mean, can you really believe this? Okay, it's the boat's going up and down, water sloshing over the bows. We're trying to get the net in, and we finally get it. I tell my grandfather, I said, this is not fair. It's 2:00 in the morning, and I'm getting seasick, and all my friends work in restaurants, and all the girls come and talk to them, and they get to eat all the ice cream that they want, and I could just imagine my grandfather thinking, I left Finland to raise this, But anyway, the landscape's in my blood, and I didn't have to do much research.
Yeah.
And
really?
Yeah,
Because
really.
you just grew up around it.
I grew up around it. Yeah.
Like the IWW, the labor conflict?
Well,
Was that
those
all
I had to
through-
research.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the massacre in whatever town that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot about the labor history in Chicago and all that. Yeah, that's all reading. And one of the things I do that I don't know if other historians do, or historical novel writers, if you want to get a feel for the time period, you don't get it out of history books. I get it by reading contemporary fiction.
Yeah.
So if you want to know what society life is in New York in 1900, read Edith Wharton. Don't read a history book, because you'll get the feel of it. And I did that with the Finnish books. I read books by Väinö Linna and Under a North Star and The Maid Silja. These are all Finnish books that were written at the time. And so you get a feel for it. And that helps a novelist.
You get more of the language too, don't you think?
You get the
because
music.
they use different terms.
Yeah,
than
right, absolutely.
Someone now would use writing about that time
yeah.
period. Yeah. And I want to touch on the labor history because that the labor movement is a time period that we don't think about too much, talk about too much, study too much, but you really bring to life like the violence and the risk and the conflict involved with it. Yeah. So, and it sounds like your grandmother really brought that alive for you, but then you dove into it more.
Yeah, right. I mean, she wasn't involved in a lot of violence. I mean, she did talk about, when they go to meetings, they'd have to take the rifles sometimes.
Wow.
Because they were afraid. I mean, but she was never involved in, any of the horrible incidences or anything. But it was just that they were much maligned. And they actually won every lawsuit. They won every lawsuit. And people, but when I grew up, it was like, well, the IWW, they're a bunch of radicals that are, trying to destroy our world. And I mean, but that's newspapers that take a side. And that's just the way it was. And, we have siloed news now. We had siloed news then, too. Just wasn't quite as widespread.
I think that was a lot of the rebranding going up to World War I, too, right? Yeah, it was very intentional revisionist history, like branding that, basically saying they're all radicals. Yeah. Radicals who want weekends.
Right, I know.
Things like
8-hour days. I mean, that's a terrible,
compensation when someone's foot gets cut off. Yeah. I want to take some questions from the audience, and you can tell us, too, if there's anything you wanted to touch on.
I've talked enough.
Okay, let's see. This is an audience question. What mistakes and misjudgments were made that led the U.S. into an ill-advised, disastrous entry into the Vietnam War?
Oh, okay.
Probably another
It's
all-night
not exactly
question.
a novelist question, but I'm game. I obviously thought about it. Look, here's my take on it. First of all, bureaucracy. They didn't allow Ho Chi Minh to put his case before American politicians. I don't know who made those decisions, but the letters he wrote, all that stuff, and then the OSS was in there working with him against the Japanese. And again, somehow it never got up to the decision makers that this guy actually wasn't trying to take over the world. But what was going on, I think, is that all those decision makers, the Bundys, Johnson, the Kennedys, they were all World War II veterans. And they really did have to fight against dictators that were trying to take over the world. So when they saw Ho Chi Minh, they said, here he comes again. And I think it was just a mindset. I don't get mad at them for that. I mean, it was a policy error, but I think it came out of their experience fighting real dictators who really were trying to hurt a lot of people. And they just thought the same thing. And instead of seeing him as a nationalist, they saw him as a communist. And so we sided with, let's face it, a corrupt Southern government and got ourselves tangled up in it. And the Kennedys, when they gave the go-ahead to murder Jim, we owned the war. I mean, it was like, because then the legitimate president of South Vietnam was murdered, and we allowed it. And it was like, now it's our war. And so we got into it, and we only could get out, if we just admitted that it was wrong, and finally we did. What I fault them for, and I get angry about still, is lying about it. I mean, McNamara wrote Johnson a memo in 1965 saying we can't win this because it's not a war that is about military stuff. It's about political stuff. And we only had about 2,000 dead at that time. We ended up with close to 60,000 dead, and because Johnson said, I got an election to win, so we're not going to talk about that. Yeah, and that I get angry about.
Yeah, at one point in the novel, you talk about your character realizing that the Vietnamese soldiers have so much more on the line, right? That they have forever because their homeland is being invaded, and the soldiers, U.S. soldiers, just have until the next election. Yeah,
no, that's true. But one of the tragedies is that I've talked to Vietnamese veterans who fought in the NBA Army. They can't say it out loud, but they can say it in private. they fought for freedom and democracy and all that stuff, and they ended up with a corrupt totalitarian government.
Yeah.
It's like their war didn't work out too well for them either.
No. But a lot of times, wars don't work out that well for anybody, in my opinion.
I think you could say that. Yeah.
Okay, this is another audience question. When you have a vague idea of a story and character, what is your process to fully develop them into a compelling plot? Do you create a document and jot ideas? How do you get meat on the bones from your wisp of an idea? Specifics, please. What is your process?
That's a good, easy question. Look, for example, if I get an image, like an old woman looking out of the window, and then I think, how do I fill in the life that I suspect she must have led? And I start trying to put myself in her skin, and then I try to put myself in her skin when she's 15, and I think it's the sort of the same thing I'm talking about. Readers being able to get out of their own skins. When you're writing and you get a glimmer, my belief is that glimmer has come from your unconscious. Mm-hmm. It is there to hook you into something, and then you grab onto it. It's like a dream, And then how do you unravel the dream? Well, you can analyze a dream and kill it, I think. But what happens is it evokes characters that are inside of you, and those inside characters are, again, parts of you that you can start to imagine you are them. And that is how you develop a character. Now, there's all kinds of things about character arcs and all that stuff, which is just, it's. But as far as the plot lines are concerned, I basically am concerned with the character arc, and then I think about how can I run this character from being, Melis, who is self-centered and, a little bit immature, to a whole person. And so then the plot sort of comes out of trying to figure out an interesting way to keep the reader reading and have his character develop over the course of the novel. And I did that with the characters, and all my characters are kind of like that I firmly believe that you don't make them up. They're inside of you. And all you do is get them out.
All your characters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Male and female.
Both, yeah.
Yep. They're all part of you.
Yes.
So I think something you said there is actually really fascinating. You said you start with images, powerful images that are stuck in your mind, basically. That image of your grandmother, and then you attempt empathy, which is going into the skin, right?
Yeah.
And I think your work really shows that process, the benefit of that process, because it's very visual. It creates a reader, a picture in the reader's mind, and then it also just pulls us in. So that's wonderful, really profound advice, actually, I think, for all of us who.
One of the things about novels is also that is really important is that details. A lot of writers will say, well, the dog came in the kitchen. No, the German Shepherd came in the kitchen. No, the 120-pound German Shepherd came in the kitchen. See, you pile the details up, and then the image is strong. If you just say the dog came in the kitchen, it's nothing there. But you put the details in, and then it's real.
The specifics ground us in that scene. Absolutely. Yeah, and I just want to mention, too, that Susan Banias, who's presenting for us tomorrow at the conference, did a wonderful interview with you, and I think collected some of those images. So if anybody would like to see some of the images that Karl's describing, you can go to Susan's, it's in Oregon Art Watch. Yeah, and that article has a number of those beautiful photographs. So, yeah, and including some of, well, wait, no, now I'm confusing my articles. But the article you just sent me has a lot of great photos of Karl when he was a young Marine.
Yes,
too,
yeah. So. It was written about me instead of, but the one that Susan wrote, I sent her some pictures of my grandmother
Yeah.
and some of my relatives. Yeah, and I didn't. She published them.
Yeah, including a couple. I don't know if were they your relatives, the couple that was holding a baby outside of a logging camp in
Yeah,
Married
but
Housing?
by the shack. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the woman was a cousin of my mother's, and I
Okay.
think that the guy's name was Bjork. But I don't. I mean, that's pretty vague because I was a kid when I collected that picture, and I didn't think anything of it then. And I think that's Mom's cousin. I'm not sure. Yeah, but it was a
I'm
great
glad you
picture because it
saved this
shows you
picture.
what one of those shacks was like.
Yeah, it does. Do you use those images as you write?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look at picture books, contemporary pictures, the same as reading contemporary fiction. You look at a picture that's taken in 1890, and geez, those pants were really up almost to his chest instead of on his hips. Yeah.
And like the description of the uneven floor, you talk about how that hurt Aino's feet to walk across
Yeah,
it, right? Like
yeah.
that is exactly how my grandparents' home was.
Yeah.
Where you could we would do it as kids, to take marbles and things.
Right, exactly.
Just
Yeah.
start it on one side and roll it across grandma's floors. Yeah. Can't be easy to walk across those floors all day. Well, thank you, Karl, so much. This has been a wonderful
pleasure.
conversation. Thank you, all of us, for joining us tonight. What? In a second. Karl will be back tomorrow teaching a workshop for us, so you can join us tomorrow at the Hotel Elliott if you want. And he's going to go sign some books and answer some more questions right now in the lobby. And we'd like to thank Beach Books for being here and selling the books for us. Thanks again for coming, everyone.